Good day, everyone. I am Julito Erquiliano Jr. I am Bis Criminology Second Year College in North Dumaguete City. I am going to report my PowerPoint presentation subject CA200 Institutional Correction Section G. So let's proceed. The Global View in Prison Administration. A large number of prison systems around the world are at a stage of crisis, the serious effects of which harm prisoners, their families, and cities as a whole. This means that right now our prison system is facing a huge crisis because they are completely affected by what is happening around them and above all in their families. The global prison crisis. The reality in many prisons tends to be not only far from international standards but also risks undermining the ultimate purpose of a sentence of imprisonment, the protection of society from crime. While the nature of the prison crisis is multidimensional, it manifests itself in the following ways, meaning that the realities in prison are not far from the international standard, as is happening in our country, which is facing a major crisis or problem, as can be seen here in the following. Continuing growth of prison population and prison and overcrowding. It is estimated that more than 10.2 million people were held in penal institutions worldwide in 2013, with an average imprisonment rate of 144 prisoners per 100,000 of the world population. In the same year, 140 National Prison Administration operated on the basis of an occupancy level of over 100%. We can see here that a large percentage of many go to institutional correction to pay for their crimes. We can also hear we can also see here that 100% of many were incarcerated in 2014. Because of this, it may affect overcrowded and overpopulation in each prison. The severe cost of imprisonment. Imprisonment disproportionately affects people living in poverty, and imprisoning large segment of society places a significant burden on state budgets. Inadequate prison conditions. Despite regional differences, prison overcrowding has developed into an acute global challenge and poses a major obstacle for the implementation of the standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. This means that the situation in the prison is worse now because they are facing a big problem, and it is the increase in the number of prisoners that is causing overpopulation in the prison, and this can cause major problems for inmates who cannot enforce prison arrangements and can cause chaos. Challenges meeting core functions of imprisonment. When penitentiary systems are overstretched and poorly managed, prisons run the risk of degenerating into dangerous places for both prisoners and prison staff, and can even turn into crime school and fertile breeding grounds for radicalization. So, when the prison is so overcrowded or overpopulated, it may not be possible to enforce prison law properly, or it may not be well managed. There may be a possibility that the prisoners will cause trouble or may become school of crime. Factors contributing to the crisis: insufficient measures to prevent crime, in particular youth crime, excessive use of pretrial detention, lack of access to legal advice and assistance, punitive criminal justice policies, and inappropriate use of imprisonment. Scarce use of alternatives to imprisonment, insufficient measures to promote serial reintegration, inadequate prison management and infrastructure, detention used as a first resort for children in conflict with the law, specific needs of women, offenders, and prisoners not met. What is institutional based correction? Institutional based correction means that the individual is placed in a prison or jail, which means they are housed in a secure correctional facility. The benefits of community-based correctional sanctions are to achieve public safety through reduced recidivism, community-based sanctions, and managing the offenders through the community. So, it is the incarceration of criminal to compensate for his wrongdoings in the community that affects the people, and above all, the incarceration of a criminal can have a positive effect on the people, such as avoiding the troubles brought by the criminal, and above is for the criminal to regret his deeds. In 2018, the Philippines held the sixth highest prison population out of 21 Asian countries. As of 2019, the Philippines population rested at 108.31 million people, and 215,000 of those people were incarcerated. Therefore, the Philippines has an incarceration rate of about 200 per 100,000 citizens. There are 933 prisons running in the Philippines. Unfortunately, they are mismanaged and overcrowded. Below are 5 important facts about the incarceration system in the Philippines. 5 facts about the Philippine incarceration system. Number 1, severe overcrowding. Rodrigo Duterte won the presidential elections in 2016. He promised to end crime within 6 months. This promise also included the killing of 10,000 of criminals. Duterte's election led to the infamous war on drugs and eventually overcrowded prisons. So, when President Duterte won, he immediately implemented the war on drugs in the Philippines. Many were imprisoned in the war on drugs because of what Rodrigo Duterte did and caused overcrowding in prisons in the Philippines, especially in Manila City Jail prison, which is one of the largest prison in the Philippines. Manila City Jail, the largest jail in the Philippines, is split into dorms and safely house 170 inmates. Currently, these dorms house around 500 people. Number 2, pre-trial detainees. According to the World Prison Brief, 75.1% of incarceration within the Philippines incarceration system are pre-trial. In 2018, 141,422 of 188,278 prisoners were pre-trial detainees. Unfortunately, many people are serving sentence without conviction. So, pre-trial detainees, it is said that many detainees in the Philippines are pre-trial detainees, which means that they have been detained for a long time before their cases are over and have not been tried or solved. And above all, they may have been imprisoned for many years or long period without conviction. Pre-trial detention is found in judicial system all over the world. In countries like the Philippines, people may serve time that outweighs their crimes. On average, prisoners in the Philippines are detained for 9 months without being sentenced. Number 3, high death tolls. About 5,200 inmates die annually at the New Bilibid Prison, or NBP. According to Ernesto Tamayo, the hospital medical chief, this, this, these deaths are due to overcrowding and dirty living conditions and inmate violence. So, high death tolls. According to this, due to the large number of inmates in the New Bilibid prison, many are also dying due to overcrowded and, and very dirty cells. And most of all, in 2019, there was a disease that could not be in control inside the prison or in the New Bilibid prison that could have caused by the illness and death of prisoners, and that is the disease of pulmonary tuberculosis or tuberculosis. At the 2019 Philippines Senate hearing, Tamayo said that there were uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis. Number 4, vigilante justice. Duterte's war on drugs escalated during his presidency. Jobless citizens were recruited to kill anyone suspected of dealing, buying, or using drugs. This was one of few ways for some people to make money. May homeless and impoverished people join the vigilante teams. In 2016, Duterte told that the public Duterte told in the public that if you know of any addicts, go ahead and kill them yourself. Together, the Philippines police force and unidentified gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers and users since Duterte's presidency in 2016. So, during the term ni President Rodrigo Duterte, it was told that he had nag-hard siya mga civilian or walay mga trabaho mga tao para mo hunt down or mo kill sa mga criminal like drug users, uh, drug lord and drug pusher, and also especially mga rapists or mga murderer. So number 5, corruption. Corruption. In August 2018, the public learned a former mayor may have been released from prison for good behavior. He was originally charged for rape and homicide in 1993. Similar stories of corruption in the Philippines prisons continued to emerge. Corruption in the Philippines is still not over. It has been proven here that when you have power in the government, you can do everything like early release from prison, even if the case you have made is serious. I believe that this work still exists in our country. In September 2018, the public learned that a woman was told her husband's sentence would be shortened if she paid 50,000 pesos or 970 dollars. Later that year, senators stated that inmates could live like a king for a fee. This information led to further allegations prison workers and officials were taking bribes to bring a distribute contraband to inmates. Prison timeline history. From the birth of modern civilizations in the 3rd millennia BC, almost every major ancient civilization used concept of prisons as a mean to detain and remove personal freedoms of incarcerated people. So, at the birth of modern civilization in the 3rd millennia BC, it is said that the different methods of incarcerating criminals and different concept of prisons for criminals who committed the crimes are existed. In those early periods of history, prisons were often used as a temporary stopgap before sentencing to death or lives of slavery. But as time went on and our civilization developed, prisons started morphing into correctional facilities that started implementing the concept of rehabilitation and reform of prisoners. In addition of holding convicted or suspected criminals, prisons were often used for holding political prisoners, enemies of the state, and prisoners of war. So, ang prison the prison is not only for suspected and criminals or convicts, it is also for political prisoners, enemies of the state, and prisoners of war. The earliest record of prisoners came from the first millennia BC, located on the areas of mighty ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. During those times, prisons were almost always stationed in the underground dungeons where guilty or suspected criminals spent their life either awaiting death sentence or a command to become slave, often working as a galley slaves. In the old days, criminals and suspected criminals had their prisons underground, where they were imprisoned to await the judgment and to pay for their deeds. Many also become slave and work as a slave. Exception from that rule comes from the home of modern democracy, Greece. Their prisoners were held in a poorly isolated building where they could often be visited by their friends and family. Primary source of their detention were not dungeons, high walls, or bars, but simple wooden blocks that were attached to their feet. Ancient Roman Empire, however, continued to use harsher methods. Their prisoners were built almost exclusively underground with tight and claustrophobic passageways and cells. So, in the ancient Roman Empire was the early days, they still continued to use violent methods for prisoner. They may have been the way to make sure that they really repented of their crime. Prisoners themselves were held either in simple cells or chained to the walls, for life or for time, as slavery was accepted norm. In those days, majority of prisoners that were not sentenced to death were sold as slaves or used by the Roman government as workforce. So in the old days, it was said that when a criminal who was not sentenced to death, you could become a slave for the Romans and you could work for life or for the crime you committed. So one of the most famous uses for the slave in Roman Empire was a gladiator. In addition to fighting in the arena, sometimes after a lifetime of training in the special gladiator training houses or luduses, many slaves were tasked as a support workforce that enabled smoother run of the popular gladiator business. The most famous gladiator battleground, the mighty Colosseum Arena in the Rome, had a slave army of 224 slaves that worked daily as a power source of the complicated network of 24 elevators that transported gladiators and their wild animals opponent from the underground dungeons to the arena floor. The conditions in the European prisons remained harsh until English royalty started being more involved with their justice system. Henry II commissioned the construction of first prison in 1166 together with the first draft of English legal system that used concept of jury. One of the most historic prison legislations was introduced in 1215 when King John signed Magna Carta which stated that no man could be imprisoned without trial. So during 1215, Henry II signed the Magna Carta which stated that no man could be imprisoned without trials. The age of modern prisons that we know today started with the several prisons reform in 19th century England. During that time, prisoners started receiving more care. Concept of rehabilitation was introduced and governments around the world, especially in UK and US, started reconsidering their views on solitary confinement, which was primary source of the increased numbers of insane, suicidal and catatonic prisoners. So when the time come, the concept of rehabilitation was introduced in prison and they were already receiving care to prevent the troubles of the prisoners such as suicide and insanity inside the prison and above all to give them second chances in life. Wars that engulfed the world in the beginning of 20th century brought the formation of large amounts of war, prison camps and concentration camps. Due to the world war that took place in the 20th century, it had a great effect on the prison because it could cause problems such as overcrowding and overpopulation in facilities for prisoners. Most famous example of those types of prisons happened during World War II when Nazi government formed over 300 detention centers in which political opponents, Jews, gypsies, criminals, and others were detained without judicial process. So one of the example of this during World War II is the Nazi. So when the Nazi government itself created 300 detention center for criminals such as political opponents, Jews, gypsies, criminal, and others. Majority of them was eventually killed on a precedented massive scale that is today estimated to be between 11 and 17 million people. During the end of 20th century, modern prison system was finalized. Concept of probation service was introduced in 1991, and 3 years before that, first prison intended solely for the holding of inmates and permanent isolation was formed. So in 1991, the modern prison system was finalized and the probation service was also introduced in prison system. Probation is a privilege granted by the court to a person convicted of a criminal offense to stay in the community instead of actually going to jail. Those supermax prisons became widespread across the entire United States, with over 40 of them being active in the year 2005. Inmates in these prisons are held in the 23 hours long periods of cell isolation, with the occasional communal communal yard time, work, educational programs, and meals in cafeteria. As of 2006, it is estimated that over 9 million people are imprisoned worldwide, with United States leading in the rate of incarceration, 743 per 100,000 people. So, this supermax prison is the most secured prison in the world and the most effective prison. Mostly, the criminal imprisoned here have heavy sentence. The different types of prison, antiquity and the modern times. What is prison? What is prison? Prison is an institution for the confinement of persons who have been remanded or held in custody by a judicial authority or who have been deprived of their liberty following conviction of a crime. A person found guilty of a felony or a misdemeanor may be required to serve a prison sentence. So, prison is where the suspected criminals are imprisoned here, where they can be imprisoned for many years, depending on the sentence given in the court. Prison is very important because it is a great help to the police to arrest those who should be incarcerated and to be able to pay for what they have done. What is the difference between jail and prison? Jail and prison are often used interchangeably, but they serve different purposes. The key difference: jail are intended for short sentences and temporary confinement, while prisons are for felony sentencing longer than a year. So we can read here that the difference between jail and prisons is that jail is for short sentences only and prison is for temporarily longer than a year. Prison antiquity times. Eastern State Penitentiary was once of the most famous and expensive prison in the world, but stands today in ruin, a haunting world of crumbling cell blocks and empty guard towers. Its vaulted skylit cells once held many of America's most notorious lawbreakers, including Slick Willie, Sutton, and Scarface Al Capone. Eastern States Penitentiary, also known for its grand architecture and strict discipline. This was the world's first true penitentiary, a prison designed to inspire penitence or true regret in the heart of prisoners. The Old Melbourne Gaol is a former jail and current museum on Russell Street in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. It consists of a bluestone building and courtyard, and it is located next to the old city police watch house and city court buildings and opposite the Russell Street police headquarters. It was first constructed starting in 1839, and during its operation as a prison between 1845 and 1924, it held and executed some of Australia's most notorious criminals, including bushranger Ned Kelly and serial killer Frederick Bailey Deeming. So, it held and executed some of Australia's most notorious criminals, including bushranger Ned Kelly and serial killer Frederick Bailey Deeming. In total, 133 people were executed by hanging. Actually, Ned Kelly was a police murderer, and Frederick Bailey Deeming was a serial killer. Frederick Bailey Deeming, he killed her wife and his three children. Prison Tuner Fort is located in Mirzapur district of Uttar Pradesh in India. Along with Chunar town, situated below the fort, the two are historic places with common history and legends. In 1890s, the fort was used as a jail for prisoners. Next is Yuma Prison. The Yuma Territorial Prison is a former prison located in the Yuma, Arizona, United States. Next is Prison Modernity Times. Number 1. Different types of prison modernity times. Minimum security. A minimum security prison may also be referred to as a federal prison camp or FPC. Most of the people in a minimum security prisons are white collar criminals, which means they've committed something like fraud or embezzlement. This prison has minimum security, which means that the prisoners assigned to it are for fraud or embezzlement cases. These are not considered dangerous to inmates unlike violent prisoners. While these crimes are still considered serious, the criminals themselves are not considered dangerous. They don't carry the same risk of violence as other prisoners might. Number 2, low security. Low security. Prisons, also called a Federal Correctional Institution or FCI, will have a double fence perimeter and other cubicle or dormitory style housing. Like minimum security prisoners, they usually have work programs or other types of program. While the staff to inmate ratio here isn't very high, it is higher than out at a minimum security facility. So, low security. This prison can be considered as a dormitory style for inmates, and there are also programs for inmates, such as work and so on. It can also be considered low security, really, but they have double fence perimeter in every dormitory or any cubicle. Number 3, medium security. Medium security, most common criminals end up in a medium security prison. These are probably the prison most familiar with. They have large or cell style housing, a strict daily routine, and armed guards. So, medium security, this prison can be considered familiar to us because it houses high sentence criminal and prisons that show the potential to escape from prison so that they cannot serve their full sentence. And above all, this medium prison is, we can say that the forces are strong when it comes to security, and there are also many programs for inmates. Other features of medium security prisons include strong perimeters like via double fencing with electronic detention system, a high staff to inmate ratio, and an assortment of strong internal controls in order to keep order. These prisons also have different types of work programs and other programs. Number 4, maximum security. Maximum security or high security prisons are for dangerous and violent offenders. Maximum security is, this prison is for dangerous people and violent acts. This prison has many guarded guards, and we can say that security is also strong here to really enforce safety on every inmate and prevent trouble. Everyone in maximum security prison is considered high risk. The staff keeps a close eye on the inmates, and others a very and there's a very high staff to inmate ratio in their source of prisons. While there are multi-occupant cells, there are also single-occupant cell in the prisons. Number 5, Supermax facilities. A Supermax prison is a facility within a maximum security prison. This is where the most dangerous and hardened criminal are kept, and it's also where the inmates who have trouble being controlled are kept. The main goal of Supermax facility is to keep everyone safe, including the inmates, prison staff, and the public. This is where inmates will be sent if they've shown violent behavior against a staff member or another inmate, or if they've seemed to have a trouble following the rules in other lower security facilities. Supermax facilities may also house those on death row or inmates who are part of another type of special population. So Supermax facility. This prison is home to dangerous people and different to control prisoners. And this is also where people with death row sentences or are imprisoned. We can say that the security here is very strong to really ensure the safety of the inmates and also for the staff who work here. Number 6, ankle bracelet for home detention. Ankle monitors are a form of surveillance. They are an electronic device that is fitted to a person and worn around the ankle. They are also called ankle bracelets or ankle tags. They are commonly worn by defendants who have been sentenced to house arrest or those who are on parole or probation. So, ankle bracelets for home detention. This method is for prisoners who have been sentenced to house arrest or are on parole and probation. Perhaps this ankle bracelet contains GPS to ensure and maintain the location of a prisoners. Number 7, halfway house. Prisoners halfway house or RRCS are aimed at helping criminal reintegrate into a society. Usually, a low-risk criminal with a year left on their sentence will be given the option of serving the remainder in a halfway house as a way to improve their chances with when back in the real world. So halfway houses, the halfway house is the one that will give a second chance to release a prisoner who is considered not dangerous and has 1 year left on their sentences. They may serve in a place and home to find out if they deserve to return to society. Number 8, juvenile options. A person who is under the age of 18 years old is legally considered a juvenile. Juveniles are not put into the same prisoners as adults. Instead, they're put into a facility or program that's specifically for juveniles. There are several types of sentencing options in a juvenile court, ranging from incarceration to incarceration options. Incarceration options include home confinement or house arrest, placement with a relative or in a foster home, a juvenile detention facility, or a probation following a stay in a juvenile detention facility. On rare occasions, a juvenile may be sent to an adult prison based on the specific circumstances of the case. So in juvenile incarceration options include incarcerating a minor in a house or home confinement and in a juvenile detention center and incarcerating a minor with adults depending on the case. There are several non-incarceration options too. These include verbal warning, fines, required counseling or community services, electronic monitoring via a wrist or ankle bracelet or probation. The non-incarceration option may not incarcerate a minor, but may require proper counseling, fines, and wearing an ankle bracelet, and above all, probation. Number Number 9, military prisons. The different branches of the military each have their own prisons that used to house any military personnel who was broken the law, specifically if that crime impacts national security. Military prisons are also used to lock up prisoners of war. So there are also a military prison for military personnel who are guilty who do not follow the military law properly, and it is also for prisoners of war. Number 10, podular jails. A podular jail, also sometimes referred to as a direct supervision jail, is different from the jail that have rows of cells. In a podular jail, the inmates are housed in a units or pods that are built around a common center space. This allows for more consistent and direct supervision of the inmates for the sake of keeping negative behavior at bay. This isn't the types of incarceration that would be used for dangerous criminals because there's too much interaction with other inmates, which could lead to problems. So, podular jail is like a house or dormitory with high security, like many cameras in each prison and we can say that it is not a prison of dangerous and violent prisoners, because the prisoners here interact with each other and communicate. And there must be a big a possibility that could lead a problem if they could if they join, or if the dangerous criminals mabutang diha sa popular jails. Next is psychiatric prisons. When a person breaks the law but is considered to be mentally unfit for a traditional prison, they'll be sent to a psychiatric prison. This prison resembles hospitals, and it's where the prisoners can get treatment for their mental disorders. Instead of simply confining the inmate, psychiatric prisons also strive to help them. So psychiatric prison is for criminals who are mentally ill. Here they here they are treated, and psychiatrists do their best to treat them well. So these are the different types of prison modernity times. Religion in prison. Detainees in prison have the right to freedom of religion. There should be no discrimination based on religion, and detainees equally have the right not to subscribe to a religion. Prisons authorities should ensure that detainees adhering to a religion can take part in private and collective prayer, have visits from religious representative, and have possession of religious objects, sign and material. So, prisoners should have the right to choose their religion, and they must not discriminate against their decision whether they have or do not have a religion. Detainees should also have a have the possibility of observing the requirements of their religion. For example, relating to food, clothing, hygiene, and grooming. The right to religion in prisons. Prisons are often characterized by the coexistence of detainees belonging to diverse religions, as well as detainees who do not adhere to any religion. Under international human rights law, everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So, it should really be enforced that there is no discrimination against inmates regarding their religion. This applies equally to detainees and means that they have the right to choose and change their religion, as well as the opportunity to manifest their religion in worship, observance, practice, and teaching in detention. Religious indoctrination and forcible religious conversion of detainees are contrary to the freedom of religion in prisons. So it states that all prisoners should have the right to choose a religion without discrimination, and that prisoners should be allowed to make their own decisions. All recognized religions. The right to religion in prison applies to all recognized religions and should not be restricted to the main religions in the country. It should not be the rule of prison authorities to decide what is religion and what is not. This will normally be decided by the competent state authorities and national courts. All recognized religions. The extent to which the right to religion is respected in prisons often reflects the level of religious freedom in society at large. In countries with a state religion where religious freedom is severely restricted, the freedom of religion in prison is less likely to be ensured in practice. So we can say that religion is very important to us, especially to prisoners who need to have the right to have a religion. Non-discrimination. Prison staff should not discriminate against persons because of their religious beliefs, and all religions should be treated equally. In no circumstances should staff make derogatory comments about a person's religious beliefs or practices. Prison staff should respect for detainees' religious beliefs, objects, and practices. So, the religions of the prisoners must be respected, especially those who work in the prison. They should let go and give respect to their beliefs. Detainees also have the right to adhere to any religion. Detainees should not be required to practice a religion or to attend religious services or meetings. to take part in religious practices or to accept visit from a representative of any religion. Detainees who do not have religion should not suffer any disadvantage because of this. So, if prisoners have the right to have their own religion, they should also have the right to have no religion. Religion's role in prison. Religion's role in prison. Religion's value in prison is often about its contribution to the individual growth or development of a inmate, particular inmate. The focus is to perceive role of religion in helping lower the chances of recidivism among inmates. The religion is very important to prisoners because it helps them. They may learn not to engage in violent acts and may never return to bad living. Other reasons it focuses on the immediate value that religions have for inmates through their help in their coping and survival. The influence and practice of religion in the correctional setting is as old as the history of prisons. Initial entry of religion into prisons was probably carried out by religious men who themselves were imprisoned. The beginning in the days of Constantine, the early Christian church granted asylum to criminals who would otherwise have been mutilated or killed. Therefore, the religion of institution correction is hard to be is said to be old in prison history. In medieval times, the Roman Catholic Church developed penal techniques later used by secular states such as the monastic cell that served as a punishment place for criminal offenders. In 1593, the Protestants of Amsterdam built a house of correction for women and one for men in 1603 in Rome. What are now the Sister of Good Shepherd built correctional facilities for women. So 1703, Pope Clement built the famous Michael Prison as a house of correction for younger offenders with separation, silence, work, and prayer emphasized. Early settlers of North America brought with them the customs and common laws of England, including the pillory, the stack, and the whipping post. Munay formation sa the pillory, the stack, and the whipping post mo nang nasa picture. So grabe kayo pamagi sa una. So during the 18th century, isolating offenders from fellow prisoners became the accepted correctional practices. It was thought that the long-term isolation combined with in-depth discussions with clergy would lead inmates to repent or become penitent, sorry for their sins. Thus, the term penitentiary was derived. Based on this, I think that a prisoner who has been incarcerated for a long time may have regretted what he did, perhaps because of his experience inside the prison. West Jersey and Pennsylvania Quakers were primarily responsible for many of the prison reforms. They developed the idea of substituting imprisonment for corporal punishment and combining the idea of the prison with the workhouse. The prototype of this regime was the Walnut Street Jail in Philadelphia that in style reflected the Quakers' belief in man's ability to reform through reflection and remorse. Belief education as a tool for reducing criminal activity also assisted in the growth of religion in prison. Because of the limited budgets of correctional institutions, chaplains were often called upon to be the sole educator in many American prisons. The schooling the schooling often consisted of the chaplain standing in the dark corridor with a lantern hanging from the cell bars while extolling the virtues of repentance. So, the schooling is a big help to the prisoners. It can help the prisoners to learn how to be a good person, and most of all, education has helped a lot in having a religion inside the prison. In the last 200 years, many religious groups have entered correctional facilities to provide religious service to inmates. One of the most famous advocates for volunteers in corrections was Mountbatten Booth, the daughter-in-law of William Booth, who founded the Salvation Army. Many older correctional institutions are being refurbished or destroyed, replaced with facilities designed for better observation and security. Yet the initial influence of religion on the philosophy and the redesign of the penitentiary will surely remain in correctional history. The influence of the Roman Catholic Church. What is Roman Catholic Church? The Roman Catholic Church, the branch of Christianity headed by the Pope. The Roman Catholic Church is governed by a hierarchy with the Pope at the top and the lower levels, bishops and priests. The Roman Catholic Church traces its history to Jesus Christ and the apostles over the course of centuries. It developed a highly sophisticated theology and elaborate organizational structure headed by the papacy, the oldest continuing absolute monarchy in the world. So what is the influence of Roman Catholic Church in our society? The Roman Catholic Church had complete influence over the lives of everyone in medieval society, including their beliefs and values. Rather, the church's fame in power and wealth had provided them with the ability to make their own laws and follow their own social hierarchy. It provided unity by having everyone came together at this one church to pray, and it provided stability by letting people have the one thing they still really had, hope in God. So the Roman Catholic Church has a great influence in the people, the environment, because it helps us to be together and have a strong connection with each other. Name. Who is Pope John Paul, pro-life Pope? So Pope John Paul II was the head of the Catholic Church and sovereign of the Vatican City state form state form of 1978 until his death in 2005. He was elected pope by the Second Papal Conclave of 1978, which was called after John Paul I, who had been elected in the August of succeeded to Pope John died up John's died after 33 days. The contribution of Pope John Paul, pro-life Pope. Pope John Paul II is remembered for his successful efforts to end communism as well as for building bridges with peoples of other faiths and issuing the Catholic Church's first apology for its action during the World War II. So mao na siya muna yung mga contribution ni Pope John Paul the pro-life Pope. Pro-life Pope. So that's all. That's all in my reporting in my PowerPoint presentation. And thank you and God bless.